Blood drips onto the Italian marble, one drop, then another. The woman on the staircase says only one thing. "Carter, darling, don't ruin the rugs." Then she turns, walks up, leaves it there. A crowbar slams into the oak door. Once, twice. The wood splinters open. In the dark corner, a trembling hand presses against a shattered phone screen. A contact list nearly empty. No name. Just a single letter. V. It rings exactly once. A voice, low and cold as water moving beneath river ice. 17 minutes. Stay away from the door. I am coming. The line goes dead. The crowbar strikes again. 16 minutes and 58 seconds left. And the thing about to come through that gate is not human. Blood doesn't lie. That's the thing nobody tells you. Not the doctors. Not the lawyers. Not the men in expensive suits who shake hands over mahogany tables and call it civilization. Blood tells the truth every single time. It pooled on the Italian marble in a slow, patient circle. Not dramatic, not the way it looks in movies. Just steady, inevitable. The way a faucet drips when no one bothers to fix it. Rose Callahan watched it fall from her own chin and thought, absurdly, stupidly, about the cleaning schedule. Tuesday. She'd just mopped that floor on Tuesday. Her name was Rose Callahan, 24 years old. Auburn hair that refused to cooperate under any weather condition or professional obligation. 240 pounds of a woman that the world had spent considerable energy trying to convince was too much. Too loud when she laughed. Too big when she walked into a room. Too visible when people like the Aldridges preferred their staff to be furniture. She'd learned to move like furniture. Kie, peripheral, replaceable. 7 foster homes had taught her that before the Aldridges ever had the chance. 7 different kitchens where she learned to eat fast and apologize faster. 7 different adults who looked at her the way people look at a problem they didn't budget for. She'd carried that education into every room she'd ever entered after. Walk small. Talk less. Don't let them see how much space you actually need. The Aldridge estate on Round Hill Road in Greenwich, Connecticut had 32 rooms, limestone and glass. The architecture of money so old it had stopped announcing itself and just stood there, certain of its own permanence. Helena Aldridge had inherited it from a husband who inherited it from a father who had done something in the 1920s that generated considerable wealth, and that everyone in Greenwich had agreed, through decades of practiced silence, not to examine too closely. Rose had a room above the garage, no window, a cot 2 inches too short, a single bulb on a pull chain that swung when the wind came off the sound. She didn't complain. Furniture doesn't complain. And she was good at her job. Exceptional, actually. The floors gleamed. The silver was polished to mirrors. The seasonal arrangements in the front hall changed every 3 weeks, precisely and beautifully, without anyone asking. Mrs. Helena Aldridge had once remarked to a dinner guest, not to Rose, never directly to Rose, that the girl was adequate. Rose had filed that one away with the others. Tolerable. Acceptable. She'll do. The vocabulary of people who need you but resent the needing. Carter Aldridge was 26 years old and had never once been told no by anyone who couldn't be fired afterward or bought before. That's not a character flaw. It's a design. A deliberate and expensive one. He'd been built over years and with considerable financial investment into the specific type of man who moves through the world with the absolute bone-deep certainty that consequences exist for other people. The certainty of someone who had watched his entire life as money smoothed over every sharp edge, every wrecked car, every failed semester, every woman who should have pressed charges and chose not to. He drank Macallan 25. Not because he could taste the difference between that and something half the price. Because the bottle looked right in his hand. Rose had cleaned up after his drinking for 3 years. She knew the stages with the precision of someone who'd had to learn them for survival. Stage 1, charming. Loud laughter, generous tips to the staff, nicknames for everyone that nobody asked for. Stage 2, restless, pacing the parlor. The particular frustrated energy of a man who is everything and is quietly furious that everything isn't enough. Stage 3, quiet. Stage 3 was the one that made the back of her neck go cold. It was a Tuesday in late October. The Long Island Sound was doing everything it could to the coastline that night. Trees bent sideways. The windows of the estate sounded like they were negotiating with the storm. The Aldridges had hosted 14 for dinner, hedge fund managers, 2 local politicians, a woman whose name Rose never caught, but whose earrings alone cost more than Rose would earn in a decade. By midnight, everyone was gone. By 12:30, the dining room looked like the aftermath of a slow-motion disaster. Crushed lilies, Pinot on the cream tablecloth. Half a wheel of brie abandoned mid-story about someone's property on Nantucket. Rose worked. That's what she did. She worked and didn't think about her feet, which had been in these shoes for 11 hours, and didn't think about the knot in her lower back, and absolutely did not think about Carter Aldridge, who had stayed behind in the parlor with the decanter of Macallan and no one else. She heard him before she saw him, the footsteps. Uneven. Too deliberate in the way that drunk men make deliberate. Each step a small performance of control. Eyes on the floor, crystal into the dustpan. Stay small, don't make eye contact, don't react. Be furniture, look at you, from the archway, slurred at the edges. Something underneath that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite anything else. Rose didn't look up. I'll be out of your way in a moment, Mr. Aldridge. You're always in the way. He stepped into the room. She could smell the Macallan from 6 feet. You take up half the damn room just standing there. Do you ever think about that? Yes. Every day, every single day. She said nothing, fat little pig, he said. Like reading the weather, conversational, uncomplicated, rooting in the mud, the dustpan, focus on the dustpan. He kicked it out of her hands. Not a casual kick, he wound up for it. She heard the shift of weight a half second before impact. And then the silver dustpan skittered across the Persian rug, and glass went everywhere, and Carter Aldridge was already moving. She tried to stand. Her knees didn't cooperate. Halfway up, when his hand caught a fistful of her hair and yanked, the sound she made was not dignified. She grabbed at his wrist. Please. Shut up, not loud. Stage 3 quiet. The crystal decanter was in his other hand, heavy. She had exactly 1 second to understand what was about to happen. It connected with the side of her head. The world tilted. The floor came up fast. The marble was very cold against her cheek. Blood welled from above her left eye and moved in a slow, warm line down her temple. Unhurried, patient, dripping onto the Italian marble she had mopped on Tuesday. Above her, the staircase, Helena Aldridge stood on the landing in a silk robe, looking down, not alarmed, not horrified, considering the way you consider a stain on good linen, whether it can be saved or whether the whole thing should just be thrown out. Carter, darling. Her voice was entirely level. Don't ruin the rugs. She turned. Walked back up the stairs, her footsteps perfectly measured. The robe whispered against the mahogany banister. The darkness of the second floor swallowed her completely. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Not cruelty, exactly. Cruelty implies heat, implies some feeling underneath it, pushing things along. This was something colder than cruelty. This was a woman deciding that the Persian rug beneath her son's feet deserved more consideration than the human being bleeding on the marble below it. Rose understood, in that moment, that the medical examiner had probably already been paid. That the story, the clumsy maid, the unfortunate fall, the stairs, such a tragedy, had probably already been written somewhere in Helena Aldridge's meticulous files. This was not a loss of control. This was a plan. Carter's foot connected with her ribs. The sound it made was wrong. A crack she felt before she heard it. Structural. The sound of something being compromised that was not built to be compromised. She screamed. She didn't decide to. The body has opinions the mind can't always overrule. Adrenaline doesn't care about your dignity. Doesn't care about 3 years of training yourself to be invisible. It grabs the wheel from wherever you've retreated and it drives. Rose drove. Backward across the marble, hand under herself, the white-hot argument from her ribs ignored. Feet found, running Dervis hallway, kitchen. Muscle memory doing the navigation because her head was doing something unreliable. The edges of vision sliding in and out, the blood the full from above her eye making the left side of the world unreliable. Butler's pantry. Heavy oak door. She threw her weight against it. All of it, every pound the world kept telling her was too much, and felt it slam home. Found the deadbolt. Got it. Carter hit the other side 30 seconds later. The wood shuddered. Held, you're dead. Muffled through the oak. Loud enough. Do you hear me? You're nothing. You're absolutely nothing. She slid down the prep counter to the tile floor, pressed her hand to the wound above her eye. Her fingers came back dark, no windows in the pantry. Nowhere to go. The police in Greenwich were on the Aldridge payroll. She'd known that for 2 years, filed it away with all the other facts she knew and did nothing with. Because what do you do with a fact like that when you are 24 years old with $7 in savings, and no family, and no one who would answer if she called? She pulled out her phone. Cracked screen. Long diagonal fracture. Still working. She opened her contacts. Not many. Coworkers she'd lost touch with. A dentist. The pharmacy. A woman from her last foster placement who'd been briefly kind before moving to Arizona. And one entry with no name, just the letter V. 3 months ago. The Aldridge Summer Gala. 120 people in the ballroom, every one of them certain their presence was the most important thing happening that evening. Rose had circulating with champagne. Flat, uncomfortable shoes, a uniform that fit badly, the specific invisibility that service staff achieve at events like this. She'd been watching the floor, not aesthetics. Watching the floor meant not making eye contact. Not making eye contact meant not being seen. Not being seen meant surviving the evening without incident. She walked into him, not quite literally. Close enough that the champagne sloshed. 2 drops, she counted, because she cataloged disasters automatically and immediately. 2 drops on the left shoe of the man standing in the corner. She was on her knees before she'd decided to be. Reaching for the cloth in her apron pocket, a hand caught her wrist. Not rough, not grabbing, just present. The hand of something that stopped a lot of motion over a lot of time and knew exactly how much pressure was required for each. She looked up, tall, the kind of tall that rearranges the geometry of a room. Dark suit, bespoke in a way that made everything else in the ballroom look like an approximation of clothing. Dark eyes, not dark brown, not very dark. A dark that wasn't a color so much as an absence of light, like looking into something that doesn't reflect because it has decided not to. He was looking at her wrist, not with irritation. Not calculating the cost of a service person, ruining his evening. He was looking at the bruise, a week old. Yellow-green at the edges, purple at the center, the shape of 4 fingers, specifically Carter Aldridge's 4 fingers, from an incident in the east hallway she'd filed under, "Do not revisit this." The man in the dark suit looked at that bruise for a moment that lasted longer than the situation called for. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, produced a card, matte black, minimal, a small gold crest in the upper left corner, and a phone number. No name, no title, no company. He tucked it into her apron pocket with a precision that suggested he'd thought about exactly how to accomplish this without attracting attention. "My name is Edmund," he said. Low, not performed. The natural register of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard, for reasons she couldn't have articulated, something underneath the sound. A depth. Depth. Like hearing something travel through water rather than air. If the people in this house ever forget their manners. "Call me." He stepped back, lifted his champagne, returned his attention to the middle distance as though nothing had happened. Rose stood, straightened her apron, returned to the circulation route. She hadn't known his last name. Hadn't known he was Edmund Voss. Hadn't known that Voss Holdings made the Aldridge fortune look like loose change found under a couch cushion. Hadn't known any of the things she didn't know yet, which were considerable and would shortly become relevant. She'd known one thing: a man had seen the bruise and done something about it. Quietly. Precisely. Without asking her to perform gratitude, she saved the number under V, back in the pantry. The crowbar found the door. She could hear the difference. The heavy, purposeful impact of metal on wood versus the earlier frantic pounding. Carter was past the uncontrolled spilling of his rage now. He was working. Methodical. That was worse. That was the thing that made the pantry suddenly feel much smaller than its dimensions. The center panel of the oak door cracked. Splintered, a jagged hole opened 8 inches wide. Carter's face appeared in the gap, flushed, sweating, eyes too bright with the specific luminosity of someone who has gone somewhere they're not coming back from easily. "I can see you," he said. Almost pleasant. "You think hiding is going to save you? No one is coming for you. No one gives a damn about you." "He's right," said the part of her that had been compiling an evidence for this conclusion for 24 years. He's right, he's stop." She reached into her apron pocket. Found the phone. Found V. Her thumb was shaking. Functional shaking. She could work with functional shaking. She pressed call. It rang once, Rose, his voice. Exactly as she remembered it. Low and certain, and carrying that quality she still didn't have a word for. Like something that had been present in the world before the building she was sitting in, before the city around it, before most things that currently existed. He knew it was her, unlisted number. 3 months of silence, middle of a storm. He knew immediately, and without question. She pressed her hand harder against the wound above her eye. "Can you come get me?" Less than a second of silence on his end. "Where are you?" His voice had changed. The warmth hadn't left exactly, but something else had arrived underneath it. Something that moved in the way cold water moves under river ice. Controlled, old, absolute. The voice of something considerably older than the man she'd met at the gala. "The pantry," she said. Her ribs made the breathing expensive. "He's breaking the door. 17 minutes. Background noise on his end. Glass, maybe. And the distant mechanical roar of something starting. Stay away from the door." "I am coming." The line went dead. She looked at the cracked screen. 17 minutes. The crowbar hit the door again. 16 minutes and 58 seconds left. 20 miles away, Bedford, New York. A private road that didn't appear on any public map, cutting through 400 acres of forest that had been deliberately left difficult to navigate. A house that described itself, from the outside, as a manor, and was in reality something considerably older than the word manor was built to contain. Edmund Voss stood in his library, not pacing, standing. He hadn't paced in centuries. Pacing was for people who hadn't learned that stillness was more efficient than motion, when motion wasn't yet the answer. The library had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 walls and every surface covered in books that had actually been read. Spines soft from handling, margins dense with annotation in at least 4 languages across at least 3 centuries of handwriting. A fireplace doing serious work against the October cold. 3 other people occupied the room with Edmund, all of them old in ways that didn't show on their faces, all of them mid-argument about a European acquisition that had been ongoing in various forms for 6 weeks. Edmund's phone, in his inner jacket pocket, was set to a single dedicated frequency. 1 number could reach it. He'd given that number to exactly 1 person, 3 months ago, in a ballroom full of people who would not have understood why. When it vibrated, he raised 1 hand. The room went silent immediately. These were not people accustomed to being silenced by a raised hand. But they were accustomed to Edmund Voss. He took the call. He heard her voice. Thin, controlled. Afraid in the precise way of someone who had been afraid long enough to become professional at managing it. "Can you come get me?" And behind her voice, the sound of something heavy hitting wood in a regular, purposeful rhythm. The temperature in the library dropped 20 degrees in under 2 seconds. Not a metaphor. Not an impression. Actually, frost traced the edges of the floor-to-ceiling windows. A thin crystalline pattern spreading outward from each pane, as though something on the other side were breathing against the glass. The 3 other people in the room stepped back, not in panic, not dramatically, in the careful, deliberate way of people who recognize what they're looking at, and understand that removing themselves from the immediate vicinity is the only intelligent response. Edmund's eyes, normally a dark warm hazel that resisted easy categorization, went black, not dark brown, not very dark, black, flat, total. Like looking into something that has decided not to reflect. 17 minutes. Stay away from the door. "I am coming." He did not walk out of the library. He was simply no longer in it. The subterranean garage held 7 vehicles. He walked past 6. The Aston Martin DBS Superleggera was matte black. Coincidence or not, depending on your interpretation of things. And the V12-less engine turned over with the sound of a large and patient animal asked suddenly to run. He reversed out before the door finished opening. Route 22 was wet and dark and largely empty, which was the evening's only mercy. Edmund drove at a speed that made the car's onboard systems register a sustained protest he did not acknowledge. The rain was a solid wall. The wipers were doing everything they could and accomplishing approximately half of what was needed. He didn't need them the way a human driver would. He saw the rain as individual suspended things. He saw the road with a clarity that existed outside normal human perception. Every reflective marker, every patch where water had compromised the asphalt's grip, every curve telegraphed by physics before the headlights reached it. His hands on the wheel were not adjusting and correcting the way human hands adjust and correct. They were deciding, once, in advance, and then being right. His mind was in the pantry with her. He'd noticed her the moment she walked into the gala, not because she was performing, not because she was demanding attention, but because of the way she moved, with the careful, apologetic precision of someone who has been taught very thoroughly that their presence is a problem requiring management. He'd spent 800 years learning to recognize that particular quality in people. It was one of the few things that still caught his attention, after 8 centuries of things that mostly didn't. And then she'd been close enough for him to smell the bruise, not a figure of speech. There is a specific chemical signature to tissue damage inflicted by another person. Something in the combination of stress hormones and broken capillaries that is distinct from accidental injury, distinct from illness. He developed the ability to detect it over more years than he found useful to enumerate. He'd stood in that ballroom and smelled Carter Aldridge's fingerprints on her arm and had made a calculation. The calculation had involved Carter Aldridge's approximate location, the number of witnesses, the political complications. The question of whether the satisfaction of removing the problem immediately was worth what would follow. He'd decided it wasn't. Not quite. He'd given her the card instead. He'd told himself he was creating a resource. An escape route. He'd told himself it was practical and nothing more. He'd been lying to himself, which at his age required a certain effort, and was, in its way, impressive. What he'd actually been doing, standing there with his card in her apron pocket and the sound of her careful footsteps retreating, was thinking about what was underneath the bruise. Not the injury, the blood itself. He'd been thinking about a book, 13th century, written in a cipher that had taken him 60 years to fully decode. A book that described, in language the author clearly felt was obscure enough to avoid causing widespread alarm, a bloodline, sanguis regis. The blood of the first sires, a genetic inheritance diluted so far across the human population, so randomly distributed, so vanishingly improbable, that it appeared perhaps twice in a millennium. In ordinary people. People with no knowledge of what they carried, no extraordinary circumstances, no obvious markers, just a blood type no standard test would identify. Just a rhythm to the heartbeat. Specific, complex, unmistakable. He'd been hearing that rhythm in his memory for 3 months every time he allowed himself to think about her. He hadn't allowed it often. The speedometer crossed 145 miles per hour. Hold on, he thought, though she couldn't hear it. Hold on just a little longer. Back in the pantry, time had gone elastic. 9 minutes could stretch into an hour, or compress into nothing. Rose had stopped tracking it. She was focused on more immediate variables. The crowbar was through the door now. The hole was wide enough for Carter's arm to come through and grope at the deadbolt. He couldn't quite reach it. She watched him try. There was something almost clinical about it. The gap between his absolute certainty that he would win and the simple mechanical reality of his arm being 6 inches too short. The arm withdrew. She heard him recalculating. Her ribs were delivering a constant and detailed report on the structural damage. She breathed in increments, pressed her apron against the wound above her eye until the fabric was saturated, and held it there anyway, because the pressure was the only thing that felt like agency. No one gives a damn about you. She sat with that sentence and looked at it, honestly, the way she'd learned to look at difficult things. The way you develop when disappointment has come often enough that you've stopped protecting yourself from the truth of it. 7 foster homes. 24 years. And if she was genuinely honest, she didn't have a strong counter-argument. There was a man she'd exchanged maybe 45 seconds of conversation with at a party, whose voice, when she'd reached it through the cracked screen, had somehow made the sound of the crowbar recede in her consciousness. Not because it was comforting in any way she could easily name, because it sounded like something that had made promises before, and understood what promises were for. The arm came back through the hole. Something in Carter's hand this time, jabbing at the deadbolt mechanism. She pressed tighter into the corner between the refrigerator and the wall. 17 minutes, Edmund had said. She had no idea how many had passed. The gates of the Aldridge estate on Round Hill Road were 10 feet of wrought iron set in stone pillars placed in 1887. They had survived 137 years of New England weather in all its varieties. They did not survive the Aston Martin. Edmund did not touch the brakes. It wasn't a crash. Crashes involve loss of control. This was a decision, a very large, very fast, very deliberate object meeting, a stationary object that lacked the option of moving aside. The gates tore free from their stone pillars, not bent, not buckled, free. The entire structures lifted and thrown onto the manicured lawn in 2 separate pieces. The car stopped in front of the entrance, destroying in the process a marble fountain commissioned in 1923 from an Italian sculptor whose name was on a plaque that was now in 3 pieces on the gravel. Edmund was already out of the car. The front doors of the Aldridge estate, solid mahogany with a steel core, installed after a hurricane in the 1990s, rated for 150-mile-per-hour winds, lasted less than a second, not broken. Not kicked in, removed. The frame, the hinges, the elaborate brass hardware. Everything went down the entry hall in a spray of wood and steel and plaster dust and embedded itself in the far wall. Edmund stepped through the opening. The security alarm began screaming, then stopped. Every electronic system in the house failed simultaneously and without explanation. The silence was complete. The kind of silence that has weight. Carter Aldridge emerged from the service hallway with a crowbar and the specific bravery of a man too drunk and too certain of his own invincibility to be appropriately afraid. He'd heard the gate go. He'd heard the doors go. He squinted into the gloom of the foyer, lightning. Through the ruined doorway, one flash, strobing, in the center of the debris, illuminated in that fractured light, stood a man in a dark suit, untouched by the rain. Hands at his sides, not moving. Not surveying the room the way a person surveys a room they've just entered. Just standing there with the stillness of something that already knows everything worth knowing about its surroundings and is waiting for the surroundings to catch up. The temperature in the hallway dropped, perceptibly, physically. Carter Aldridge could see his own breath. "Who the hell are you?" His grip on the crowbar tightened. "This is private property. I'll have you arrested." "My mother?" Edmund moved. Between one beat of Carter's heart and the next, he was no longer by the door, inches from Carter. Carter had exactly the duration of one incomplete thought to register this before Edmund's hand closed around his throat. He left the ground, entirely, one-handed. Edmund's arm didn't flex, didn't strain, just extended, straight, supporting Carter Aldridge's full weight with the apparent effort of holding a paperback. Carter's hands went to Edmund's wrist, scrabbling, nails, achieving nothing. "You," Edmund said quietly, "have touched something under my protection." His freeze hand moved to Carter's right arm, the arm that had held the crowbar. The arm that had held the decanter. He didn't twist it. He applied pressure. Steady and geometrically precise to a specific point, the way you apply force when you know exactly what you're doing and have done it before. The sound the bones made did not belong in a house. Carter tried to scream. Edmund's grip on his throat reduced it to a pressurized wet sound that went nowhere useful. On the staircase, Helena Aldridge, hand to her mouth. The color of someone whose financial calculations have just been interrupted by physics. Let him go. Then, because authority was the only language she'd ever spoken fluently, "I am telling you to release my son." Edmund turned his head. His eyes, black and flat, found hers. She stopped talking. "Helena Aldridge." His voice filled the entire house without being raised. Not volume, simply the acoustic property of a voice designed, at its deepest level, to be heard. "By morning, your hedge fund will be under SEC investigation. Your accounts at Chase will be frozen. Your board seats will have been vacated. The people you've cultivated across 40 years of strategic dinner parties will have received certain documentation they will find disqualifying. This house will remain standing. That is the current extent of my generosity. If you speak the name Rose Callahan to anyone, in any context, for any reason, what I've just described will seem comfortable compared to what follows." Helena Aldridge sat down on the stair, not gracefully. The stair simply caught her. Edmund released Carter's throat, dropped him. Carter hit the credenza on the way down. The credenza hit the wall. Carter ended up on the Persian rug his mother had specifically requested be spared, his broken arm at an angle that would require significant reconstructive work, his face against the fibers. Edmund stepped over him. The pantry door, on Rose's side, the crowbar had gone quiet. Then footsteps, rapid, then stumbling. A thud somewhere deeper in the house. The alarm, brief and then gone. Then a silence so thorough it had texture. She pressed her back against the refrigerator. Breathed in the increments her ribs allowed. She didn't know what had happened. She knew the crowbar had stopped. She knew the man she'd called might have arrived, or something else might have arrived. And the version of events where calling Edmund Voss made things dramatically worse was one she hadn't eliminated. She'd called a man she'd met once, in a ballroom. Because he'd given her a black card and she had nothing else. This, said the part of her brain with 24 years of evidence, is what happens when you have nothing else. The pantry door moved, not the hole, not Carter's arm, the entire door. Hinges releasing, wood pulling free from the frame, the whole ruined slab tilting outward and falling. Edmund Voss stood on the other side. His suit was somehow intact. His shoes were dry. His hands were at his sides still, and she would think about his hands later when she had room to think about anything at all. He looked at her. She waited for the thing that came after the looking. The adjustment, the recalculation, the flicker of something in the vicinity of pity. It didn't come. He looked at her the way. She didn't have the language yet. She'd look for it later. The way you look at something you've been thinking about for a while and are relieved to find exactly where you left it and intact. He dropped to one knee, not slowly, down decisive so he was at her level rather than above it. His jacket touched the tile floor and he didn't acknowledge it. Rose, not a question. Her name landed like punctuation. You came, she said. I promised, he said. And then, because she was bleeding, from her head and her ribs were engaged in a structural argument she was losing, and because she had been alone for a very long time, and the weight of that had been accumulating for 24 years, and had apparently selected this specific moment to present its full invoice. She started crying, not theatrically, steadily, the way blood drips. Inevitable. Edmund reached out, she tracked his hand, automatic, trained, and it moved toward her face without hurry. His fingers were cool and very still when they made contact with her uninjured cheek. Something happened. The pain didn't disappear, but it receded, like a sound moved one room farther away. Still there. No longer the only thing in the room. I don't think I can walk, she said. You don't have to. I'm too. She stopped. The word she'd been carrying. Heavy. Much. Difficult. I'm too much to carry. Something moved in those dark eyes. Not pity. Something that contained pity, but was considerably larger. You weigh nothing to me, he said. He picked her up, one arm under her knees, the one around her back. He stood in a single motion, no adjustment, no effort visible anywhere, as though her weight were a rumor he'd considered and dismissed. She wrapped her arms around his neck because she needed something to hold. He smelled like cedar, old paper, rain that hadn't touched him. She buried her face in his shoulder and let him carry her out. Over Carter Aldridge, past Helena on the stairs, through the ruined doors. Into the storm, the rain came sideways. He walked through it. She wasn't sure if she was getting wet. The world had narrowed to his footsteps, the steadiness of his grip, the cedar and paper smell of the lapel against her cheek. He opened the passenger door of the Aston Martin. Lowered her into it with the same precision he brought to everything. Then, and she would think about this later, what it meant. He buckled her seatbelt. Paused to do it. Thought it mattered. He walked around to the driver's side, started the car. The V12 said something large and uncomplicated about its own capabilities. He pulled out past the pieces of the gate, past the destroyed fountain, through the rain, and turned onto Round Hill Road. Don't sleep, he said. Because of the concussion? Yes, she watched the streetlights go past, his hands on the wheel. Perfectly still. Perfectly certain. Where are we going? She said. Home. He said she thought about that word, what it meant, what it had never meant. 7 houses, the garage apartment, the cot 2 inches too short. Who's home? She said. He glanced at her. The streetlights caught his eyes for a moment, and for just that moment, they weren't the flat black she'd seen in the hallway. Something warmer underneath. Something that had been there for a long time and had recently been reminded of itself. Ours, he said. Then he looked back at the road. In the pocket of her apron, ruined now, pressed against her chest, the matte black business card rested against her heartbeat. A heartbeat Edmund Voss had been hearing in his memory for 3 months. A heartbeat that sounded exactly like something described in a 13th century book he'd spent 60 years decoding. A heartbeat that was not, in any sense, he fully understood yet. Something that should exist in this century. He drove through the Connecticut dark. The storm held. The speedometer settled at something the car preferred not to discuss. Neither of them said the true thing, which was this. The 17 minutes were over. What came next would take considerably longer, and neither of them intended to go through it alone. She woke up falling, not literally. But the brain does what the brain does after trauma. It replays the floor coming up, the cold marble, the sound that shouldn't be in a house, and then it registers, in the same breath, that the surface underneath is not marble and is not cold. It is, in fact, the most aggressively comfortable mattress she has ever been on in her life. Rose opened her eyes, crown molding. Hand-painted Victorian. Elaborate botanical patterns in cream and gold, spiraling across a ceiling that was, by any reasonable measure, 15 feet above her. A chandelier at its center, crystal, and the morning light coming through tall arched windows was catching every facet and throwing small precise rainbows across the silk duvet. She lay there and ran the assessment. Beatty, ribs aching, functional. The blinding edge of last night's pain reduced to something that could be managed. The wound above her eye, she touched it carefully, stitched. Clean, well done. Clothing, not the uniform. Not the apron. A nightgown. Satin. Deep burgundy. Plus size. Fitted correctly, which meant someone had known her measurements before acquiring it, which meant this had not been improvised. Mulligation, a bedroom larger than the entire garage apartment above the Aldridge estate. Antique mahogany, a fireplace recently used. Actual paintings on the walls, not prints, not decorative gestures, paintings, the kind that belong in museums and somehow ended up here instead. She sat up. Her ribs registered an opinion. She acknowledged it and sat up anyway, on the bedside table. Water. 2 pills in a small ceramic dish. A handwritten note in angular, precise script that looked like it had been learned from a source predating modern penmanship education. Dr. Briggs has confirmed 2 fractured ribs and a moderate concussion. Take these. They will help. I am downstairs. Ishi took the pills, drank the water, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room, outside. Trees, old ones. A rolling landscape under a sky that had cleaned itself after last night's work. She could hear, actually hear, from here, nothing. No traffic, no neighbors, no household waking up around her, just birds, just the fire settling. She thought, where am I, then? Who paid for this mattress then? Those pills were already here when I woke up, which means someone came in while I was sleeping, which means... The door opened. Edmund Voss without a suit was a different equation, not diminished. Not domesticated. Different dark cashmere sweater, fitted trousers, no jacket, no tie, no armor. He carried a large silver tray with the same easy certainty he carried everything. Without appearing to notice its weight, he set it across her lap. Not broth, not dry toast, not the portioned plate of someone who'd assessed her and made decisions on her behalf. Steak, properly seared, roasted potatoes with butter, asparagus, a small dish of hollandaise, a pot of Earl Grey with the bag still in it, dark and slightly bitter, the way she actually preferred it, which she had never told anyone. He looked at the tray for a moment that went on too long. You made this? Dr. Briggs made it. I instructed. You instructed someone to make steak. For breakfast, you've been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. Your body has had a significant structural event. It needs protein. Calories, he paused, pulled a chair from the corner, sat, crossed one ankle over his knee. It needs to stop apologizing for existing. That last part landed somewhere different than the rest. She picked up the fork, put it down, picked it up again. The Aldridges. Carter. What happened after? Carter underwent emergency surgery on his arm at Greenwich Hospital at 3 this morning. By 6, the primary Aldridge accounts at Chase Private Client were frozen pending an SEC inquiry filed by an anonymous source with very specific documentation. By 8, their board seats at 2 separate companies had been vacated. Goldman Sachs has blacklisted the family name. The Greenwich property is under lien review. She stared at him. You did all of that, she said. In one night, I am a man of substantial resources. She didn't have the right word. Terrifying was accurate but felt ungrateful. Impressive was accurate but felt insufficient. That's a lot, yes, he said. Eat, she ate, and it was remarkable, actually. Not because the food was exceptional, though it was, but because nobody told her to slow down. Nobody looked at her plate and made a calculation. Nobody said anything at all. Edmund sat in the chair and drank his coffee. Black, no sugar, and looked out the window. Not watching her, just present. Available, not performing at her. She ate the whole tray. She'd think about that later, too. That she ate the whole tray and the thought of apologizing for it never arrived. She was on her 2nd cup of tea when the door opened without a knock. The woman who entered wore a Chanel suit the color of winter fog. Cut precisely. Expensive in the way that dispensed with logos, because logos are for people who need the confirmation. Platinum hair pulled back so severely it appeared structural. Her face was stunning in the way that had nothing to do with warmth. The beauty of something refined down to its absolute minimum over a very long time. Her eyes moved to Rose immediately. Stayed for 2 seconds, assessing. Then she looked at Edmund. We need to talk, she said. Edmund didn't turn from the window. Good morning, Isadora. The council has been calling since 4 a.m., I'm aware. Doyle intercepted 3 inquiries from Manhattan. Also aware, Edmund. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it tightened. A cable under load. You destroyed a family last night. Left a 26-year-old in surgery. Removed 2 sets of reinforced doors from their frames in a residential neighborhood. He broke 2 of her ribs, Edmund said, still not turning, and fractured her skull. The doors are a civil matter. Isadora's gaze moved back to Rose. Rose looked at her directly. She'd learned to read a room at the age of 7, faster than most adults, because she'd needed to. And what she read in Isadora Crane wasn't what she'd expected. Not anger, not territorial aggression. Something older and more complicated than either. Something that knew exactly what it was doing and had decided that knowing wasn't a sufficient reason to stop. "You'll want to know about the financial exposure," Isadora said. To Edmund, but not looking at him, "Tell me. When you froze the Aldridge assets, you triggered a collateral claim. Charles Aldridge, before he died, sold 40% of his private equity firm to the Drax cartel in Manhattan. Capital and protection. By eliminating the Aldridge financial network, you cost Roland Drax approximately $600 million in secured holdings. The room changed temperature. Rose felt it the way you feel a door open onto winter. Not dramatic. Just suddenly, undeniably present, Edmund turned from the window. "Drax wants compensation," Isadora continued. Her eyes moved to Rose. "He sent a message this morning. What did he ask for?" "A life," Isadora said, "for a financial loss." He was specific about which life. And Rose, who had survived 7 foster homes and 3 years in the Aldridge estate, by learning to read the precise temperature of any room she entered, looked at Isadora Crane's face and understood something immediately. "You knew before you came in here," Rose said. Isadora looked at her, really looked. "For the first time, you knew," Rose said again, "and you came in person, in front of me. Which means you're not just delivering a message, silence. The kind that means someone has said the accurate thing." "Get out," Edmund said, not loud, not performed. Isadora looked at him once, at Rose once. Then she walked out, her heels precise on the hardwood, and the door closed with the controlled click of someone who had enough discipline not to slam it. Rose set down the teacup. She pushed the tray aside, swung her legs over the edge of the bed, feet on the cold floor. "Standing, where is my uniform?" "It was, don't tell me it was incinerated," a moment. "It was incinerated, then give me a coat, a blanket." Something. She moved to the armoire, opened it, empty velvet hangers. I heard what she said. 600 million. A man who wants compensation. And the compensation is me. She turned back. "I'm not doing this." "Doing what, specifically?" "This," she gestured at the room. "The chandelier, the tray, the overwhelming, untenable situation. I'm not going to be the reason someone comes for you. I'm a maid. I was a maid in someone's house and they hit me, and you helped, and I am grateful. Genuinely." She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. "But this is not my world, and I won't pull it down on you." Edmund stood, walked toward her. She tracked him, automatic, trained. He stopped several feet away. "Enough space, sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing, you have 2 fractured ribs. I know what I have. Sit down, Rose." She sat, because the ribs were making a persuasive case. And because something in his voice, not a command exactly, more the register of "I am asking you for one specific thing and it matters," made standing feel suddenly beside the point. He returned to the chair, across from her. Morning light between them. "Before I tell you what Doyle reported," he said, "I need you to hear something." She waited. "I went to that gala because I was required to. Political obligation. The kind that accumulates when you've been operating in a city as long as I have." He looked at his hands, then at her. "I had been standing in corners at events like that for longer than I can usefully describe. I had stopped expecting to see anything I hadn't already seen. When you walked across that room, I noticed you. Because I almost spilled the before that plane. No performance, because of the way you moved, because of what it meant. Because in 800 years, he said it the way you say, something that has stopped being remarkable because it has simply become fact. I have learned to recognize someone who has been convinced their presence is a problem. And I have learned those people are almost never the ones who deserve to be convinced." Rose was quiet, and then I smelled the bruise. She went, still. "I made a choice I've been reconsidering since," he said. "I should have removed Carter Aldridge from that ballroom in October. The situation would have ended there. I didn't. I made a calculation about exposure and politics. While I was making it, you went back to that house and lived through 3 more months of it." The room held the silence. "So when you say you're grateful," he said, "I need you to understand I am not congratulating myself for last night. Last night was the minimum. Last night was what should have happened 3 months ago." Rose pressed her hands flat on her knees. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're about to decide to leave," he said. "I want you to decide with accurate information." He told her about the Sanguis Regis. Not quickly. Not rushing toward the conclusion. The way you tell a story you've been carrying for a long time. Carefully, with attention to the parts that strain credulity, with acknowledgement that they strain it. The first sires, the original bloodline, A genetic inheritance diluted so far across human history that it surfaced unpredictably, randomly, twice in a millennium if that. A dormant marker no standard medical test would find. A specific resonance in the blood itself. A rhythm to the heartbeat. Complex, precise, unmistakable once you knew what you were hearing. The blood of a sanguis regis carried properties that multiplied vampiric ability tenfold in any vampire who consumed it. Not sipped, consumed entirely, drained. Which was what Roland Drax intended to do with her. To become something no one in any council anywhere could check or balance or stop. Rose listened to all of it. She was good at listening. You learn to hear the thing behind the thing when you make your living being present in rooms where people don't think about you. When he finished, she said, how long have you known this about me? Not accusatory. A direct question. I suspected at the gala, the heartbeat. The blood itself, he held her gaze. I told myself I was wrong, that it was vanishingly improbable, a beat. I was not wrong, and you didn't say anything. What would I have said? Good evening. You may carry a mythological blood type. Here's my card. She almost laughed, which surprised her. The fact that a laugh still existed somewhere in her body after last night was, she thought, evidence of something. So the gala wasn't random, she said. My presence was obligatory. Yours was employment. But Drax, he paused. Doyle's report indicates Drax's people identified your resonance 6 months before that evening. They knew what you carried before I did. They were watching. They put me in that house. You were already there. But they ensured you stayed, said carefully. Carter Aldridge's behavior was his own. But the protection around him. The financial arrangement his father made before he died. The guarantee that no one in Greenwich would interfere. Those were not accidents. Rose sat with that 6 months. Someone had known what she was for 6 months. Had built a cage around her and left her in it. Not as a prisoner exactly, but because a well-maintained cage keeps its contents accessible. She'd thought she had no options. Thought the padlocked refrigerators and the 7 foster homes and the Round Hill Road garage were just her life. The accumulated weight of being the wrong size in the wrong places at the wrong times. Some of it was that, some of it had been architecture. And the thing about discovering that someone built the maze you've been lost in, it doesn't make the years of being lost easier. It just adds a specific cold anger on top of everything else. An anger with corners and dimensions and somewhere particular to point. Can they track me here, she said. Not currently. But the wards on this property aren't permanent. Their trackers are sophisticated. Given time and proximity, is there a permanent solution? He was quiet, Edmund. First time she'd said his name without it feeling like trespassing. Is there a permanent solution? He told her about the blood binding. The way you tell someone about something irreversible, with the particular gravity of a person who knows the weight they're putting on the table and is choosing to put it there anyway. Ancient. Predating most things either of them could reference. When a vampire's aura was bound to a human's blood, the human's resonance, the frequency psychic trackers followed like a signal, was eclipsed. Overwritten. She would disappear to anyone searching for her by supernatural means. She would register to them as Edmund, not as property. He was careful about this distinction. Said it twice, which meant he'd thought about how to say it more than twice. Not ownership. Alignment. 2 life forces calibrated to the same frequency, each carrying something of the other, each feeling, faintly, what the other felt. It required complete consent from both parties. It required his bite, her blood, a single drop of his, freely given, permanent. No reversal. She looked at him across the morning light. You're asking me, she said. Yes, not telling me it's the only option. There are other options. Less effective. They buy time. This buys permanence. If I say no, then I find another way. No hesitation. I call in favors from people who owe me several centuries of favors. We manage it. She studied his face. The controlled stillness. The way he held the question in the air between them, without pushing it toward an answer. Why do you care this much? She said. About specifically me. 800 years. You've met everyone, he said, simply. Without self-pity, I have met everyone. And in 800 years I have known perhaps 4 or 5 people with the quality that you have. What quality? He took a moment. The ones who survive cruelty without becoming cruel, he said. Who take blow after blow from the world and decide, every morning, not to pass it forward. Not because they lack reason to, because they choose not to. Rose looked at her hands. I don't feel like that person, she said. No one who is that person ever does, he said. And before she could find a response, the door opened. Doyle was not a man who opened doors dramatically. He opened them because information required delivery, and delivery required presence. He stepped in, took in the room without comment, and addressed Edmund. "There's a problem," he said. His face was a geography of old damage. Scar tissue across the jaw and left cheekbone from something that had happened in Paris in 1789 and had never fully resolved despite the considerable healing advantages available to his kind. His voice was flat, not cold. "Efficient, tell me," Edmund said. "Isadora, I intercepted a coded transmission from her personal device at 11:30 last night. Before she came to us this morning, Edmund went still. Not tense, still. The stillness of something that has been surprised and is not going to allow the surprise to run the room. She sent it to Manhattan," Doyle said. "Full architectural layout of the estate, patrol schedule, perimeter rotation. And the location of this room," Rose looked at Edmund. Before Edmund said yes, she already knew Drax's response when she delivered his message. Yes. A silence that had the shape of something being confirmed that everyone had hoped would remain unconfirmed. "Why?" Rose said. Both men looked at her. "I'm asking genuinely," she said. "I'm not angry. I just want to understand. Why would she do that?" Doyle looked at Edmund. Edmund looked at the window briefly, then back. "Isadora Crane has been with this organization for 300 years, he said. "She has been," he stopped. "Chose differently, loyal." In her way, Rose said. "Not for money," Edmund said. "She's made a calculation. That immortal woman," he said it directly, without softening it, because softening it would have been its own form of condescension, "who will age, get sick eventually, die on a human timeline, is not worth what I am risking, and she's communicating that calculation to Roland Drax," Rose said by handing him a map to my bedroom. "Yes," Rose considered it, not quickly. Actually sat with it and gave it weight. "She's wrong about the calculation," she said finally. Edmund looked at her. "Not because I'm worth it." "I'm not making that argument," Rose said. "I don't know what I'm worth. But she's wrong about the logic. Because the question isn't whether I'm worth the risk," she looked at him directly. "The question is what kind of man you are when no one's forcing you to be anything." Doyle looked at the floor. Edmund looked at Rose for a long time then. "Doyle." A few minutes, Doyle nodded, withdrew. The door closed. Edmund stood, walked to the window, hands behind his back. The morning light doing something to the line of his shoulders, the quality of his stillness. 300 years ago, he said, "I would have made Isadora's calculation." Rose waited. "I would have said, a mortal life is brief. The political complications are significant. The rational choice is clear." He turned back. "I would have been right, mathematically. And wrong in the way that only mathematically right things can be wrong. What changed? Nothing changed," he said. "That's the point. I have always known, theoretically, that some things outweigh survival and strategy. I have spent most of 8 centuries choosing not to act on that knowledge because the cost was high and the beneficiaries were strangers." He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. Not close, but present in a way that had weight to it. "You are not a stranger," he said. "You are not a political complication. And I have spent 3 months convincing myself otherwise because the alternative was inconvenient. The alternative being admitting that I gave you that card because I already cared what happened to you, flat. Direct. Not romantic, more like a man who had finally stopped arguing with an obvious conclusion. And that the 3 months I spent not acting on, that were 3 months wasted." Rose looked at him. She'd heard a lot of words from a lot of people in 24 years, words used to manage her. Words designed to extract something useful and leave nothing in return. She was good at hearing what was underneath words. What she heard underneath his was not performance, not strategy, not charm deployed toward an objective. A very old man finally being honest about something he'd been circling for longer than he wanted to admit. She said, "If I agree to the binding, yes, it's permanent, yes. What will I feel? Something of what I feel. Not all of it, not constantly. More like a background frequency, another presence in the room even when the room is empty, and you the same. Your well-being at a distance, not intrusive, but there, and I'll read as you. To them, yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved her hair back from the left side of her neck with one hand and turned her chin, not dramatically, not performing. "Just moved, then do it," she said. "Rose," you asked. "I'm answering." She didn't look away. "I've spent 24 years making decisions based on what I was allowed to want. I'm making this one based on what I actually want, a beat. Which is to not spend whatever time I have left waiting to see if Roland Drax finds me before I figure out what my life is supposed to look like. Edmund moved the chair, came to stand beside her. She was aware of his height, the stillness, the cedar and old paper smell, a smell she was going to associate with something specific for the rest of her life. She already knew that. He reached up and moved a strand of her hair, carefully, with one finger. "I will be careful," he said. "I know," she said, because she did. She couldn't have explained how. Maybe it was the seatbelt. Maybe the handwritten note and the pills placed before she woke. Maybe the way he'd dropped to one knee on the pantry tile so he wouldn't be looking down at her. She knew. He leaned in. The temperature around him shifted, the air cooler than it should have been, the specific gravity of something very old moving carefully near something it did not want to damage. His lips touched her neck first. Barely. A deliberate announcement. Not stealth. Not something she wouldn't see coming. Then the fangs, not pain. She'd expected pain. The sharp bureaucratic kind, the blood draw kind. Instead, something that moved outward from the point of contact like heat. Like a door opening inside a cold house, she gripped the edge of the mattress, not to stop anything, just to have something to hold. She felt the rhythm of it, deliberate, measured, not consuming, not greedy, exactly what was needed. Not one measure more. A very old precision, and then he pulled back. She felt the absence of it the way you feel a fire banked. The warmth still there, the source withdrawn. He made a small cut on the inside of his wrist. The blood there was darker than she expected. Richer. The color of something that had never been ordinary. "Just a drop," he said quietly. "That's all it takes." He pressed the wrist gently to her lips. She drank one drop. It hit her tongue like electricity meeting water. Like the difference between a photograph of somewhere and actually standing inside it. Every sense she had stepped up simultaneously. Birds outside audible individually. Cedar from the fireplace 2 floors below clearly distinct. The grain of the silk duvet under her palm precise in a way that hadn't been possible a minute ago. The ache in her ribs stopped, not reduced. Not dulled, gone. She felt she would spend a long time looking for the right word, located. For the first time she could remember. As though a point on a map had her name on it and she was standing directly on it. For the first time in her life, at the base of her throat, a warmth bloomed where his mouth had been. She reached up and touched it. Her fingers came away clean. No visible mark, but she could feel it. A small constellation of sensation. Like a hand resting on a table in the next room. A frequency. A second heartbeat. Just below her own. She looked at Edmund. He was breathing harder than she'd seen him breathe. His eyes were entirely black. The composure of him was present but strained at its edges. The way a wall looks after significant pressure from one side. Holding. But you can see where the force was applied. "Did it work?" she said. He closed his eyes. Opened them. The black retreating slowly toward whatever warm dark he operated from normally. "Yes," he said. He exhaled. "You're covered." She turned the word over. Not hidden behind, not erased. Covered. The way weather covers something. The way darkness covers. Not absence. Protection. She could work with that. Then the floor moved, or not the floor, but something below it. Something that transmitted through the foundation and the walls and the antique furniture and the impossible mattress as a deep structural shudder. The kind that travels up through your feet and arrives in your chest before your finishes processing what your ears registered. The chandelier swung. Once. Twice. Settled. Rose and Edmund looked at each other. Something moved in his eyes. The warmth contracting. The ancient thing underneath arriving at the surface, with the quiet, methodical inevitability of a tide that doesn't hurry because it knows exactly where it's going. "The outer wall," he said. Not a question. He stood. Reached for the tactical vest on the back of the door. She noticed he'd put it there. Had put it there before coming upstairs with breakfast. Which meant he'd known this was possible before he'd come upstairs with breakfast. But he'd come anyway. He'd come upstairs with steak and Earl Grey and a handwritten note, knowing a war might be arriving. She filed that. He strapped the vest on fast, practiced. The way someone does something they've done thousands of times across a very wide variety of bad situations. He looked at her. "The library," he said. 2 floors down. Blood iron locks that require my specific signature. Nothing short of military ordnance breaches them. "Stay inside. Stay away from the windows." He moved toward the door. "Doyle has the perimeter. I have the interior, Edmund." He paused. She stood. The ribs made their argument. She stood anyway. All of her weight, every pound. "Planted, come back," she said. He looked at her, the black eyes, the ancient face. 800 years in a tactical vest, stopped in a doorway because someone had asked him to return from a war. Yes, he said. Then he was gone. The blood iron lock at the end of the hall engaged with a heavy final sound. A sound like something that knows precisely what it is and what it exists to do. Rose stood in the center of the room. She closed her eyes, and in the new frequency she was now carrying, strange and bone deep, and already feeling less strange than it had 2 minutes ago. She felt him, 2 floors below, moving, fast and certain, and without a single molecule of hesitation. She pressed her hand to the base of her throat, the warmth there, the small, specific warmth of a decision that had been made. Outside, the second explosion was considerably larger than the first. The second explosion was bigger, which meant they weren't testing the perimeter anymore. Done testing. Moving Rose felt it through the floor, through the bones of the old house. A deep structural shudder that traveled up through her feet and arrived in her chest before her brain finished processing what her ears had picked up. The library chandeliers they swung. Once, twice, settled. She was already moving, the library. 2 floors below the bedroom. Edmund had walked her past it briefly that morning. The way you gesture at a room you use constantly and have stopped seeing. She'd clocked it then, floor-to-ceiling shelves. 3 walls of books with cracked spines and margin notes, and the smell of paper read by multiple generations of hands. A fireplace. A long mahogany table covered in maps she hadn't looked at closely enough. She was looking at them closely now. The blood iron lock had sealed behind her when Doyle delivered her here 6 minutes ago. His instructions: stay inside. Stay away from the windows. Wait, she was doing one of those 3 things. The maps were operational. Topographic overlays of the Bedford estate, the surrounding forest, Route 22, every access road. Hand annotated in Edmund's angular script. Patrol routes, perimeter positions, points of structural vulnerability marked in red. She studied them. Because growing up in 7 different houses teaches you to understand the geometry of any space you occupy. Which doors lock from which side, which exits are actual exits, and which ones just look like exits. The permanent, unrevisable difference between a safe place and a place that has the ferrets of safety. She was doing the calculation she'd been doing her whole life. Except now the calculation wasn't about her own escape. It was about everything else. Through the frequency, the new, strange, already less strange frequency the binding had placed in her like a second heartbeat, she felt Edmund, not his thoughts. Not his specific experience, more like pressure. The way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive, because the air changes and something in your joints registers it before your eyes do. He was in the east wing. Moving fast, certain. The absolute zero calm of him came through the bond, as something she could only think of as gravity, a mass so dense it bent the space around it. He was not afraid. She hadn't expected him to be afraid. But feeling the not afraid of it directly, in her own chest, was different from knowing it intellectually. She pressed her hand flat on the mahogany table, closed her eyes, pushed back through the frequency. Not words, just presence. The way you put your hand on someone's arm in darkness to tell them you know they're there. A ripple came back, quick, deliberate, warm in a way that had edges to it. He'd felt it. She opened her eyes, outside. Perimeter lights strobed in patterns she couldn't decode. Gunfire, irregular, multiple sources, the kind that doesn't resolve into individual events, but accumulates into a sustained terrible weather. The specific sound of things breaking that were structural. A scream, cut short. She turned back to the maps. The windows were behind her, not in front, behind. She'd positioned herself with her back to them, and her face to the door, without consciously deciding. Old reflex, old habit. Except this time the habit was wrong, because the door had a blood iron lock that nothing was getting through. The threat model for the door was essentially 0. The windows were a different calculation. She turned around, 3 tall arched windows, old glass, wavy with age, the stone terrace beyond them, the darkness of the tree line beyond that. No ward lights on the terrace side, she thought. Why are there no ward lights on the terrace side, she thought. Doyle said stay away from the windows. He said it specifically, not stay in the center. Not stay away from the door, the windows. Which meant he already knew the windows were the relevant variable. Which meant someone had already identified the windows as the point of entry. Which meant the first window exploded inward. Not from outside, the glass simply went. Cleanly, silently. As though something had reached through the ward on the other side and removed it from consideration. a ward that had been switched off from inside the house. The curtains blew back in a rush of cold October air, wet, carrying the smell of the forest and something underneath it. Metallic and wrong, the chemical signature of something very old and very hungry that had been running through dark and rain for a long time. Rose didn't move. She was already still. Already running the assessment. 3 seconds of just wind and curtains. Then Roland Drax stepped through the frame, tall. Thin in the deliberate way, a body reduced over centuries to its most functional components, everything unnecessary stripped away. White suit soaked through, worn with the specific arrogance of someone who believes his clothes make statements that weather isn't qualified to contradict. His eyes were yellow, not amber, not hazel. Yellow. The flat, sickly yellow of old bone. The yellow of something that had stopped being right a long time ago and had kept going regardless. 2 of his people came through the window behind him. Large. Moving with the coiled efficiency of things that don't bother hiding what they are because hiding has never been necessary. Drax looked at the room, the maps, Rose. His mouth moved into something that was technically a smile. Well, he said. Dry, papery, dead leaves on stone. There she is, Rose said nothing. You've caused my family a considerable inconvenience, he said, walking, slow. The way things walk when they're certain the thing in front of them isn't going anywhere. Not personally, I'm sure. You seem like a straightforward girl. But your existence, and Edmund Voss's apparently catastrophic response to it, has cost me $600 million and 2 weeks of political capital I won't recover easily. Still nothing from Rose. You smell different than I expected. He stopped, tilted his head. Something shifting in those yellow eyes. Interesting. He's moved quickly, his eyes narrowed. Doesn't matter. The binding is new. Incomplete the way all new things are. We can still reach what's underneath. He looked at his 2 people. Hold her, he said. Don't touch the throat. They moved fast. Both of them. From different angles. The calculated approach of people who had done this many times and expected a very specific and familiar sequence of events. The target freezes, panics, attempts to run in a direction already accounted for, and is in the end a human being. Soft, slow, limited except. The moment Drax's people came through the window, Rose felt the bond shift. Not dramatically, not with any fanfare. A door opening somewhere at the base of her spine. The sanguis Regis blood doing something she had no language for because she'd never had language for it. The way your hand pulls back from a flame before your brain has finished deciding to pull it back. The first enforcer reached her in under a second, claws extended. Aimed at her shoulder, she stepped inside his guard, not away. Inside. Toward him. The wrong direction by conventional logic, which was the only reason it worked. His momentum was built for a target that retreated. She moved toward him, and his reach went over her shoulder, and she drove her forearm up into his elbow joint from below. The crack was clear and loud, and then her palm hit the center of his chest. She didn't think about the physics. No time. But the physics happened anyway. All of her weight, moving through her palm at a speed that had no business existing in a human body with 2 fractured ribs, directed at a sternum built to be considerably more durable than a human sternum. The enforcer left the ground. He went backward into the bookshelf. Solid oak. Built into the wall. There a very long time, it did not survive. He went through it, and into the wall behind it, and ended up in the wreckage, with the specific arrangement of limbs that indicates something load-bearing has stopped bearing load. The library went silent. Rose stood in the center of the Persian rug. Her hand was tingling. Her ribs were making a substantial argument. Her breathing was doing something complicated. But she was standing. She looked at Drax. Drax was looking at the wreckage of his enforcer, and the wreckage of the bookshelf, and then at Rose. The yellow of his eyes had gone very bright. The flat, papery composure hadn't collapsed. It was too old to collapse entirely, but it had developed a fracture. A hairline crack in the certainty. What, he said, Quiet. Almost to himself, what are you? The second enforcer hadn't moved. Running the math. The math wasn't resolving in a way he found encouraging. Rose said, You're trespassing. Her voice came out lower than she expected. Steadier. With a resonance underneath it that wasn't exactly hers. The frequency the binding had placed in her. Edmund's depth. Edmund's weight, not performed. Just present. The way a shadow is present when the light is coming from a specific direction. Drax recovered. Because whatever else Roland Drax was, he had not survived however many centuries by failing to recover from surprises. Kill her, he said to the second enforcer. Drain the throat. We take what we need and go. The second enforcer hesitated. 1 second. Just one. 1 second of hesitation from something that had never hesitated in its operational life. And in that second, the library door came off the wall. Not the hinges. Not the lock. The entire door, frame and all, pulled free from the surrounding structure, as though the wall had simply decided to release it. It went across the room and buried itself in the opposite bookshelf, with a sound like a rifle shot. Edmund stood in the threshold. He was. Rose would find the language for this later, when she had time and quiet and distance. He was not the man who'd brought her breakfast. Not the man who'd sat in the chair and been honest about his own failures, with the specific discomfort of someone who wasn't used to it. Not the man who'd asked, carefully, for her consent before anything that mattered. All of that was still in him. She could feel it through the bond. Underneath something else right now, the suit was torn. Blood on it, not mostly his, the small grazes of bullet wounds already closing. His eyes were the flat, total black. The aura coming off him was not sound and not light, but something that hit the room like a pressure wave, something with no technical name in any language Rose had encountered, but that every animal brain in the vicinity responded to with the same immediate, ancient, specific information. Apex. Apex in the room. Everything else yields or it dies. The second enforcer dropped to his knees, not strategically, involuntarily. The way legs buckle when the signal from brain to muscle is interrupted by something operating at a higher priority. Edmund stepped over the ruined doorframe. His gaze moved across the room. First enforcer in the bookshelf wreckage. Second enforcer on his knees. Rose standing in the center of the rug, her hair blown back from the window, her hands at her sides, her feet planted. He looked at her. She looked at him, through the bond. Something so intense and specific, she had to press her hand to her chest, just to have something to push against. Relief, yes, and underneath the relief, something that had been there since the gala in October and had been declining to be named. She nodded once, he nodded back, then he looked at Roland Drax. Drax had not moved. Which was, its way, the most frightening thing about him. Running would have been rational. The rational response to Edmund Voss in this configuration entering any room was to already be in a different room. But Drax had been doing this a long time too. And things that have been doing this for a long time develop a specific pathology. They begin to believe the answer to any problem is sufficient force. That if current force has failed, more force is the answer. That the architecture of power accumulated over centuries makes them, in some final non-negotiable way, unloosable. Voss, Drax said. Edmund said nothing. The council will not allow this, Drax said. Steady. Committed to steady. The Sanguis Regis is designated unrestricted. No individual claim is recognized. You've violated the Manhattan Accords. You sent 60 mercenaries to my house, Edmund said. Kia. Conversational. You sent trackers into my forest. You entered my library. You directed your people towards someone under my protection. He took one step forward. Tell me more about the Accords, the Council. I am the oldest active member of the Council, Edmund said. By 400 years. I was at the table when the Accords were written. I know exactly what they say. I know exactly what they don't say. And I know they do not say that Roland Drax has the right to drain a human being because he has decided her blood serves his ambitions. Drax's yellow eyes moved to Rose. She'll die, he said. She's mortal. She'll age, get sick, die on a human timeline, which means in decades, you'll have burned everything you've built for a footnote in someone else's history. Edmund looked at him for a long moment, then he looked at Rose. She watched him look at her, watched the calculation, not the cold financial calculation Isadora had assumed him capable of, but something else. Something arrived at through a different process over a very long time. He turned back to Drax. So, he said. Drax blinked. She'll die, Drax said again. Everyone dies, Edmund said. Some things just take longer, one step forward. The question was never whether she would die. The question was whether I was going to spend whatever time she has actually present for it, or standing in corners calculating my exposure. Drax took one step backward. Involuntary. I'm giving you the enforcer on the floor, Edmund said. Take him. Leave my property. Return to Manhattan. And tell whoever sent you, and we both know you didn't make this decision alone, that any further communication from that direction will not receive this response. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Drax was quiet. I need to hear you say it, Edmund said. The yellow eyes moved around the room. Second enforcer on his knees. First in the wreckage. Rose standing. Edmund between Drax and the only exit. I understand, Drax said. Good. Edmund stepped aside. Precisely enough room. Drax needed to leave with sufficient dignity to go home without burning the structure on his way out. Edmund understood this. Allowing it was the efficient choice. The second enforcer got to his feet. Moved to the first. Got a shoulder under him. They reached the window. Drax paused in the frame. He looked at Rose one last time. When he's gone, Drax said quietly, and you're still here. I'll be here, Rose said. You won't. Drax looked at her for a moment, then stepped through the window and dropped into the darkness of the terrace, and was gone. The library settled, not immediately. The way rooms settle after something large has happened, slowly, incrementally, the air redistributing, the surfaces resuming their normal relationship with gravity and light. Edmund stood with his back to the window, looking at his hands, not performing, not dramatizing, just looking at them with the particular quality of attention reserved for things you want to understand and aren't certain you ever fully will. Rose crossed the room. No hurry, no need to hurry. He wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. She walked across the ruined Persian rug. One corner scorched. She hadn't noticed that happening. There had been a lot happening, and stopped in front of him. He looked up from his hands. I'm sorry, he said. That you had to see. Stop, she said. He stopped. Don't apologize for that. Not to me, Rose. You came when I called. You did what needed doing. I watched you do it, and I'm still standing here. He looked at her. I'm not scared of you, she said. I need you to hear that clearly. I am not scared of you, and I am not going to become scared of you. And if you spend the next several decades apologizing every time you do something necessary, I am going to find it extremely tedious. Something shifted in his face. Complicated. Layered. The composure intact, but something moving underneath. Something held in compression for a long time, responding to the unusual experience of someone, refusing to require it of him. Several decades, he said. At minimum, she said. I'm 24. I intend to be difficult for a long time. He looked at her for a moment that stretched. Then something happened in his face she hadn't seen before. Small, quiet, unrehearsed. A thing that arrived without being summoned, the way genuine things arrive. He almost smiled. Not quite. But almost. She put her hand on his forearm. He looked down at it, her hand on the torn sleeve of his ruined jacket. He placed his other hand over hers. Cool, still. Exact. The way he brought exactness to everything. They stood there. In the wrecked library. October wind through the blown-out window. The fire holding its ground against the cold. She said, Isadora. He said, I know. What are you going to do? What I should do is let Doyle handle it. But I've known her for 300 years. And I understand why she did it. I can't excuse it. What she did put you in direct danger. And there's no version of that I can rationalize. But I understand it. Understanding isn't forgiving, Rose said. No, and it isn't letting it continue. No. It isn't that either, she nodded. Then what? Isadora Crane was in the East Corridor when Doyle brought her to the library. She walked under her own power. Chin level. The platinum chignon intact. As though she'd held it through the entire night on principle. Her Chanel suit had a single tear at the left shoulder, the only visible evidence the evening had made demands of her. She looked at Edmund. He was at the mahogany table. Maps set aside. Standing with his hands flat on the surface, looking at the grain of the wood. He didn't look up immediately. Isadora looked at Rose. Rose was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed, not aggressive. Just occupying space without apologizing for it. Getting more practice at that. 300 years, Edmund said, still looking at the table. Yes, Isadora said. I trusted you with everything, this house. The council relationships. The financial structure. Things I didn't trust to anyone else. Yes. And you gave Roland Drax a map to her bedroom. Silence, not to hurt you, Isadora said. Her voice was steady, controlled. The compression of considerable feeling into a very small container, to make you see what you were risking, what you were about to lose. For someone who will be gone in 40 years? 50, Edmund said. At minimum. She intends to be difficult about the timeline. Rose said nothing. This was not her conversation to interrupt. Edmund finally looked up. For 3 centuries I have been exactly what you needed me to be, he said. Strategic, political, efficient. I made the calculations you trusted me to make. Kept the distances you trusted me to keep. And you are angry because I have, for the first time in 300 years, stopped doing that for one specific person. Isadora's jaw tightened. 1 degree, she will die, she said. Quiet, factual. The cruelty of a true thing said at the wrong time in the wrong way. I know. Edmund said. She's told me she plans to be difficult about the timeline. But I know, and after she's gone, I'll deal with after she's gone when it comes, he said. That's what people do. They deal with loss when it arrives. They don't refuse to love something because they're afraid of the losing. The room was very quiet. I spent 300 years watching you refuse that, he said. I thought it was wisdom, thought the calculation was correct. Keep distance. Stay operational. Don't invest in what you'll outlive. He straightened from the table. She showed me it wasn't wisdom. It was cowardice. My cowardice. I'd been practicing it long enough to convince myself it was strength. Isadora looked at him. So what happens now, she said. You leave, he said. Tonight, take what you need. Go where you choose. I will make no contact and ask nothing of you. You will not contact the council. You will make no further communication with Drax or any affiliated organization. A pause. You leave. And we don't discuss this again. Not imprisonment. No, he said. 300 years of service. Reasons I understand even if I can't excuse them, and the sense not to come back. So go, she held his gaze. Looking for something in it. The edge, maybe. The trap. The calculation underneath the mercy. She found nothing but what he'd said. Then she looked at Rose. Rose met her eyes and didn't look away. Something crossed Isadora Crane's face. Brief, complicated. The expression of someone who has been absolutely certain about something for a very long time and has just, in the last 30 seconds, become slightly less certain. She turned, walked to the door, her heels on the hardwood. Precise and controlled to the last step. She paused in the doorway. She didn't turn back. Take care of him, she said, quietly. To Rose. Not Edmund, then she was gone. The corridor took the sound of her footsteps. The library held its breath. Then Edmund exhaled. The damage report took the rest of the night. 43 mercenaries incapacitated. 12 vampire cartel members dispersed. The East Wing had significant structural damage from an engagement. Doyle described in his characteristic flat effect as substantial but contained. The perimeter needed rebuilding. The front garden had been reclassified as a liability. 2 of the library's original edition shelves were architectural rubble. The windows. Always the windows. Doyle delivered all of this to Edmund in the main hall at 3 a.m, while workmen who appeared from somewhere and asked nothing began securing the damage. Edmund listened. Maid divisions. Made calls. Issued instructions in the clipped, authoritative register of a man who had been managing consequences of various kinds for 8 centuries and had arrived at a certain efficiency. Rose sat on the stairs and watched him work, not because she was passive. Not only because she was recovering, though she was. The ribs lodging their objections every 30 minutes about the wisdom of everything that had transpired in the last 12 hours. She sat on the stairs because stairs have a good vantage point, because she'd spent her entire life finding the vantage points in new spaces. And this was a new space, and she was learning it. She was learning him, the way he moved through a room when the crisis was resolved. The economy of his attention, entirely on whoever he was speaking to, then immediately entirely somewhere else, no residue. The way Doyle gave him information and the way Edmund processed it, which was visible, you could see the integration happening in real time, which was unusual in someone who controlled as much about himself as Edmund controlled. At 3:45, Doyle stepped back. The workmen settled into their rhythms. The house got quieter. Edmund came and sat on the stair below her, not beside her. Below, so they were at the same level and he wasn't looking down, she noticed. She had noticed every time. They sat there for a while. The house making the sounds of a very old building adjusting to the temperature changes of a long, violent October night. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Yes, the gala. The card. The 17 minutes, she looked at her hands. If I hadn't called, if I'd found another way out or been too scared to use your number, would you have come looking for me anyway? He was quiet. She waited. She knew the difference between silence that was avoidance and silence that was someone genuinely thinking. She'd learned that difference the hard way, from people who mostly used the first kind. This was the second kind. Probably not immediately, he said finally. I would have told myself I had no right. That I'd offered a resource and the resource hadn't been used, which meant the situation had resolved or the person had chosen differently. Both of those would have been their right, but eventually, he said, I would have done what I'd been doing for 3 months. I would have been in rooms where you weren't and thought about the heartbeat. She looked at him. 3 months of thinking about a heartbeat, she said. It's a remarkable heartbeat, he said. She laughed quietly. It surprised her. The way laughter kept finding its way out of her in situations that didn't strictly warrant it. Maybe that was what he'd meant. The ones who survive cruelty without becoming cruel. Maybe that's what it looked like from the outside. Not nobility, just a laugh still working when it shouldn't. I grew up thinking I was unlucky, she said, after a moment. 7 houses. No family. The wrong size for every room I was ever in. I thought that was just my life. The accumulation of bad draws. He was listening. Some of it was, she said. I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything was secretly a plan. Some of it was just bad luck. Some of it was just the world being the world to someone without anyone to buffer it. She paused. But some of it wasn't, and I don't know what to do with that yet. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, he said. I know, but I'm thinking about it. Thinking about it is allowed. She pulled her knees up to her chest, looked at the temporary covering the workmen had installed over the blown window at the end of the corridor, October pressing against it from outside. What do we do now, she said. Edmund looked up the staircase, down it, at the damage visible in every direction, at the house being quietly reassembled around them by people who understood that what had happened tonight had changed the operational requirements of this place in ways that would take months to fully address. Tonight, he said, you sleep. 2 fractured ribs, a healing concussion, an extreme 48 hours. Sleep, and tomorrow I make calls. There will be political consequences. Drax will recalibrate and the council will have questions and I will answer them. He paused. And you will eat breakfast. And we will begin figuring out what your life looks like when it isn't organized entirely around survival. That's a strange thing to think about, she said. It's a strange thing to have the option of, he said. Most people don't get to think about it this directly. I've never thought about what I want, she said, slowly. I've thought about what I need. And sometimes I've thought about what I'd want if wanting were something I was permitted to do, but actually sitting with the question, she exhaled. That's going to take a minute. You have time, he said. She looked at him sharply. Because that was a specific thing to say. Specific in the context of everything Isadora had said about timelines and decades and the finite nature of mortal life. Not infinite time, she said. No, he said, not infinite. But enough, he met her eyes. And I intend to be very poor at letting it go to waste. She held his gaze. Then she reached over and put her hand on the back of his. He turned his hand over, opened it. She placed hers in it, and he closed his fingers around it with the same deliberate precision he brought to everything. As though her hand were something with a specific weight he was registering accurately and wanted to get right. They sat there. The house settling, October on the other side of the glass, the workmen moving through the damage. The fire in the library still going. She could smell it from here, cedar and ash. The smell she was going to associate for the rest of her life with the moment things changed. She was 24 years old, 2 fractured ribs, a healing cut above her left eye, a bond in her chest that had placed a second frequency there like a compass needle that now had a north. She had grown up being told she was too much, too big, too visible, too substantial, too costly in the various ways that people who need you but resent the needing calculate cost. And she was sitting on a staircase in an 800-year-old man's house in the aftermath of a war that had been fought over her existence, and she was not okay, exactly. Okay was too simple. But something in the direction of okay. Something that had the shape of okay if you looked at it from a particular angle. Something that felt distantly and tentatively, and with full awareness that she'd never had reliable reference points for this before. Like being home. Not the house. Not the walls. Not the chandelier, or the botanical crown molding, or the mattress that had supported her weight like it, was designed specifically for that purpose. The hand in hers, the cedar smell. The radical and specific experience of someone asking what she wanted before doing anything that affected her. That. At 4 a.m, Dr. Callum Briggs emerged from whichever wing he'd been monitoring from and informed Rose, with the calm, unsentimental pragmatism of a man who had been solving problems for Edmund Voss for 22 years and had developed a very high threshold for surprising evenings, that she needed to sleep. She let herself be walked upstairs. At the bedroom door, she stopped, looked back down. Edmund was at the bottom of the stairs. He'd stood when she left, old reflex. Something ingrained considerably deeper than the last several centuries. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Rose," he said. She went in, the door closed. The mattress, when she lay down, was exactly as improbable as the first time. She looked up at the botanical crown molding, the chandelier. The window on this side of the house, glass intact, wards intact. The storm outside pressing but not entering, through the frequency. Faint now, settled like a fire banked for the night, she felt him. 2 floors below. Not moving, just present. The way a house is present around you when you're the only person in it. The way gravity is present. Constant. Unremarkable. Already assumed, she closed her eyes, she slept. Somewhere in London, in a building without a sign, on a floor that didn't appear in the elevator directory, a man sat behind a desk, not old, in the way that some things are not old. Simply present. As though he had always been present and would always be present, and the question of his age was a category error, a wrong kind of question, applied to a wrong kind of thing. His phone rang. He answered it. He listened. His face changed very little while he listened. He had spent a considerable amount of time developing a face that changed very little in response to information. But when the call ended and he placed the phone on the desk, he was quiet for 60 seconds. Then he opened the center drawer. He removed a book. Small, leather-covered. The leather the color of something that had been aging for longer than most things age. He placed it on the desk and opened it to the last page. One name, written in ink that had dried brown with time. A careful, precise hand. The handwriting of someone who understood what they were writing mattered and had written it accordingly. Rose Callahan, below the name, a date, this year, this month. He looked at the name for a long time. He looked at the date. He closed the book, placed it back in the drawer. He picked up the phone and said, "Convene the full council, all seats. London. Before the week ends, a pause. Because something has happened that we were told could not happen. And we need to decide, before Edmund Vossa decides for us, what we are going to do about it." He ended the call. He looked out the window at London, old and dense and rain-gray and full of things that had been happening in it for longer than most countries had existed. Then, quietly, to no one, interesting girl, in Bedford. In the library, Edmund stood alone, the window covered, the fire going, the bookshelves that had survived standing around him like old soldiers. Some worse for wear, most intact, all of them still holding what they'd always held. He stood in the center of the room. He pressed one hand flat on the mahogany table. Through the bond, faint, settled, 2 floors up, he felt her. Breathing even. The rhythm of genuine sleep. Not the shallow, fragile sleep of someone who doesn't believe they're safe. The deep kind. The kind that requires a decision, at the base level, that the place you are is a place you're allowed to actually rest in. He held that for a moment. 800 years. 800 years of standing in corners. Calculating exposure. Keeping distances that kept everything intact and everything survivable and everything exactly what it had been the century before. And now, a frequency, a heartbeat. A woman on his stairs who had looked at him in the aftermath of everything and said, "Don't apologize for that," and meant it without qualification. He looked at the map on the table, the London markers, the council contacts, the network of old obligations and older politics that was going to require significant attention in the weeks ahead, because tonight had changed the configuration of things in ways that would take time to fully measure. He'd deal with it. He dealt with everything else for 8 centuries. He reached over and turned off the library lamp. The fire was sufficient. He stood in the firelight for a moment, in the ruined and half-repaired library of a house that had seen many things, and was going to see more. And he thought about a 24-year-old woman who had pressed a number she'd never used, and asked the 5 words into the dark of a pantry and then survived the answer, he thought. 50 years, minimum. 60 if she's actually difficult about the timeline, he thought. I can work with that, he thought. I have been wasting a very long time. He turned toward the door. Time to stop.